Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Esoteric and our continuing series on the MiSter FPGA DE10 Nano project. And like always, there's a new Saturn core out, which means we're going to be testing this. And this came out on my birthday last week, and it is a new update from the previous video that I did. This is a new core build with changes, and some of the changes are absolutely spectacular. Feels like this is getting closer and closer to a real Saturn every day. Before we get started, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like, subscribe, and that notification bell definitely helps us out. If you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But people kept asking me to test Astal, and I did it earlier, and people wanted to know if it's getting better. This is one of those games that everyone seems to want to play on MiSter, and I will say, at least in the opening, things are definitely running smoother. Now, there will be some problems that present themselves, but this was a big user request, the #1 requested game I test from the last few videos, so here it is again. But the biggest difference between the last time we tested this is now there is audio, and it sounds really good. The audio on these core updates is making things even better. Every single time there's an update, the audio starts getting better on certain games. Now, there's definitely different ways to play audio on the Saturn, just like PlayStation 1, and you will notice that some games the audio will sound almost pristine, other games don't have audio whatsoever, and some crackle. But unfortunately, the problem with VDP1 and VDP2 and those layers still does persist, at least into this current build, but it's definitely running a lot smoother, and that is a ton of fun to see because this is an absolutely spectacular game. But I wanted to test one of my favorite games on Sega Saturn, and that is Bubble Symphony. I have the F3 arcade board, and I have this on disc for Sega Saturn as well. And while the audio is slightly scratchy, the gameplay and the visuals are absolutely perfect on this game. This is exactly how it should look and how it should play if you're using an original Sega Saturn. So while the audio might not be 100% there yet, what we're seeing on screen is exactly how I would expect Bubble Symphony to work. And that's what I'm noticing with this current core iteration and even the last one. Games that work really well are starting to feel exactly like they should on a Sega Saturn. And some people did request this as a test as well, and I was super happy to see that there was some love out there for Bubble Symphony, but it plays so well, and that is so much fun. This is a very rare game, only came out in Japan, and if you want to buy a copy and play it on an original Saturn, it's going to cost you a fortune. But here on MiSter, a little bit of a crackly audio, but otherwise it is spectacular. Now moving on to another user request, or multiple user requests, is Dodonpachi, and I will say that it is running, and I tested this game in an earlier video, and it didn't boot whatsoever. You can get in game, you can play, but if you can't tell already, the frame rate is a little bit of a slideshow. This is not the native speed of Dodonpachi, unfortunately, but it is stable, and that is something to be said for the current core. Some games aren't going to run at full speed, but some games like this are running where previously I had a lot of difficulty getting them to run in the first place whatsoever. But everyone wanted to see if Dodonpachi played, and now you know that it does. It is just interesting how it is having those slowdown issues, and I'm really not sure what that would be down to. I mean, it could be a couple options. It could be an instruction in the CPU that is not completely finished yet, or it could be something in VDP1 or VDP2, a certain call that might be putting a few too many cycles in and stressing out the current code. Now don't forget, I'm not an engineer, filmmaker here, so if I'm not 100% correct, leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think would cause this slowdown. One game that went from not working whatsoever until recently working is Rayman. Now this is a classic 2D side-scrolling platformer. I can't say that it's my favorite 2D side-scrolling platformer, but the love for Rayman out there is absolutely huge, and this again was another one of your biggest user requests. I got a ton of comments to review Rayman, and I will say that while there is a visual glitch here and there, the audio is spectacular. I swear it's perfect, so go ahead and listen for like 45 seconds and I will be right back. Enjoy. Now Rayman just sounds spectacular. That sounds as good as the audio that you're going to get out of a Sega Saturn, and I did check on the side. I'm not ready to put comparisons up yet because I'm not going to compare finished hardware to a work in process FPGA core. That is unfair, but on the side I did listen to it and it sounds exactly like it does here. Now on the 3D platforming side, some games that didn't used to work for me do work. Croc Legend of the Gobos being one of them. And I will say this game's definitely hard to control. It's a time and place, an era where 3D platformers could struggle with those controls, but it is running really well for what's going on right here. It sounds good, it looks good, it feels good, and it seems to be running at a native frame rate, which isn't to say a very fast frame rate. Croc was a game that could chug on the Sega Saturn, but it looks spectacular, and that's the main takeaway here, is I'm not seeing any visual glitching whatsoever in this game, and it's fun to see a mix of both 2D games and 3D games running exactly as they should visually. I mean, of course there might be a little glitch here and there that I don't notice or is going to come up in a later level, but at least for this intro area of Croc, this is exactly how it should be playing. You get the 2D elements working with those little fireball sprites. All of the different polygons are rendering perfectly fine. It just looks and feels like Croc, and this is a really fun game. If you didn't play it as a kid, I highly recommend it. But what you're going to find with a lot of games, even if they do work really well, or even if the first few levels, I might say, are a one-to-one accurate representation of the Sega Saturn hardware, you will end up in situations where sometimes it just freezes. You're going to see here, I'm going to get that Gobos, or maybe the singular is a Gobo. Leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think. And the minute I run through this gate right here, the screen goes black and it never loads again. So freezing is going to happen. Now to get into the Christmas flair, because when this comes out it's going to almost be Thanksgiving, a lot of people ask me to test Christmas Nights into Dreams to see if it ran any differently than the standard version of Nights. And I will say it doesn't run any differently, but that is a good thing because it's running so well. It seems to be full speed. All of the 3D and 2D assets are being drawn well. Again, for this game, I just don't get any audio whatsoever, but you do need to keep in mind that every single game console, CD-based or otherwise, has more than one way to actually put audio out. When the PlayStation 1 core was in development, there's the CD-DA, CD-XA audio, and there's also a sound chip on board. So you have to remember, just because sound works in one game does not mean it will work in every game, because that game could employ a certain set of hardware or standards to allow it to play that music, and that's what you're going to see, that we're still in the alpha stages of this core. Sometimes things are going to have perfect audio, sometimes things are going to have audio with some scratchy sound, and some games like Christmas Nights into Dreams are going to have no audio whatsoever. But the main takeaway for Nights is just feel how it's running. It's so fluid, the motion looks good, there's no clipping issues in the polygons that wouldn't be there in a regular game. And the best thing is, and you can't see it in a video, I can just tell you about it, is the control. I don't really feel any lag compared to what an original Sega Saturn would feel like. Controlling Night here just feels so natural, and that is a great thing, just to know that the games feel the way they should feel. It's just unfortunate that there's no audio in this yet, because the music in Christmas Nights is fun. If you've never played this game before, I highly recommend you check it out. But if you want to hear perfect audio, go ahead and listen to Puzzle Bobble 2 for 45 seconds, because this is just perfect. Enjoy. Sounds exactly like it should, and don't let that little last sound sample fool you. It does crackle, but it's just a crappy sound sample that also sounds bad on original Saturn hardware. It seems like Taito just had a heavily compressed sample for that when they made this port, and it is doing the same thing on MiSTer because it's being accurate, and sometimes accuracy means straight up jank. Now, a game that I wanted to test to see if the polygonal clipping and slowdown issue had been resolved yet is Die Hard Arcade, and I will say that that issue still exists in here, and that's definitely got to be something to do with one of the VDP chips, because sometimes if the polygons stretch over the screen, you will get some weird flashing or some slowdown. Still plays, still an awesome game, just not quite there yet. Now there's two different Proteus games on the Sega Saturn that I tested, and I will say this Proteus right here was probably the best game I played in this current batch of tests. Everything just seemed to work. The intro cutscene, the title menu, everything looks exactly like it's supposed to. And then when you actually get in game, it is spectacular. If you handed me a controller and didn't show me what hardware I was using, and you had me play this game, you could fool me if it was MiSter or Sega Saturn. I played the ever-loving hell out of this game. And one day when I do compare the core to original hardware, and I'm sure that's going to be a long time coming, this is one of the games I would use because I played it so much it really feels like something I am very familiar with. But the controls are responsive, the visuals are absolutely spectacular, this game has not frozen on me up to the point in time in which I stopped playing it, and the sound is perfect. So one last time in this video, I'll give you about 30 seconds to listen to the music, and I will be right back. Enjoy! 爆弾なのよ。ほう。いやー懐かしいな。おいしい。ほほう。ノリノリだね。えたーぎっくり腰になっちゃったよ。これで大石も安心。ダメだこりゃ。If there's any issue with that audio, leave me a comment down below because I definitely cannot hear it. But one game that also seems to be functioning one-to-one with the Sega Saturn is going to be Gex. Now this is definitely a love it or hate it game. I hear a lot of hate for Gex, but there's definitely fans out there, and I have one of them. And the great thing is the intro cutscene works perfect, and the game is exactly how I remember this game being. Now I have played it more on the 3DO than I have on the Sega Saturn, but I do own a Saturn copy, and I played a ton of Gex, loved him as a kid. And again, this just feels like playing a Sega Saturn. And usually with these preview videos, I would say it's feeling pretty close. Now there are definitely still some games that don't run whatsoever on the core, there's some games that run really rough, and there's some games that freeze constantly. But there's more games that I'm encountering now that I just say seem to play exactly like they should if you were playing original hardware, and Gex is definitely in that category. And this was also a user request, so I hope you guys enjoyed this. Leave me more requests down below and I will definitely cover them. One game that everyone requested was Street Fighter 02, and I will say the same issue I've had with this game for the last couple months persists in this current build as of November 8th. That is the fact, at least for me. Once I get to the now loading screen, absolutely nothing happens, and results may vary. It just seems to be that this core has a mind of its own. Sometimes it'll do what you want, sometimes it won't. Like with Outrun here, I always get to the now loading Outrun screen, but then it goes black and absolutely nothing happens. And that's fine, it's just a work in progress. In the Proteus Deluxe pack, I can get it into game sometimes. I get audio, I can hear the game playing, but it's playing blind with no visuals. But the takeaway from this video, if you want to play one game that feels absolutely spectacular, go ahead and play Puzzle Bobble 2 or Bust a Move 2, depending on what region you want it in. It really doesn't matter. I could say the same thing about Gex. That game also seems to be perfect, as well as Proteus, but I was just in a Puzzle Bobble mood when I made this video, so it's the game that I say you should 100% check out in your own testing. But that is the current slate of Sega Saturn games on this most current core that we have tested. But again, leave me a comment down below. I'll probably do a video on this again in 2 weeks because you guys love watching it. I love talking about it. And I did leave a Patreon link to SRG320 down below as well. He's the core maker, so if you want to go ahead and support him, I'm sure he would appreciate it. But yeah, Sega Saturn, every single update's feeling so much better, and there's probably 3 to 4 games in this test that I say play like original hardware. Short of that, we'll be back next week with more MiSter and have videos throughout the week as well. Bye bye.